Welcome to our YouTube channel, where we embark on a journey to explore groundbreaking advancements in accessibility and technology. Today we are featuring Dr. Karl W. Reid, Senior Vice Provost and Chief Inclusion Officer at Northeastern University. Dr. Reid, a professor of practice in the Graduate School of Education, will lead a compelling discussion on fostering inclusivity and diversity within the university community. Be part of building a more inclusive and diverse academic environment. Subscribe now and stay tuned for an enlightening journey into this important topic.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for once again coming to another Allied event from the Allied Event Series for this semester. This is Fahim Zubair, your project manager and your host for today, signing in officially. And let us welcome our very special guest speaker for the day. He goes by the title of the Senior Vice Provost and the Chief Inclusion Officer. So yes, you got it right. Let's welcome Dr. Karl Reid. Dr. Reid is here today.
Thank you so very much. It's a pleasure. It'll be great to meet you. If you're comfortable to introduce yourselves and your affiliation, where you are located in the university, in the university system. And then I have a few things to share, and then I'd love to open us up for a conversation as well. I have a few prompts that I've used in the past for our community, but I would love to hear more about you.
Yeah.
Well, it is a wonderful pleasure to be here, to be a part of this community and to learn from you as well. As was noted, my name is Karl Reid. I have official title, Senior Vice Provost and Chief Inclusion Officer, Professor of Practice at CPS. I think there are a couple of CPS here, yes, in education. But also, I like to say that I am a student of leadership. And when I see great leadership, I tend to gravitate toward that. And that's what Mona has given me, to something to see leadership and to really drive conversation, as well as to improve our setting, our context as well. What I'd like to share with you is just a handful of slides that really frame the direction of our diversity work here. It's evolved. I came in with a very vanilla and somewhat non-specific vision for diversity based on the work that I did. So a little background before I do that. I'm an engineer as well. I'm a materials engineer and got my master's and bachelor's degree in material science and engineering. And then I went into industry, worked for IBM and a few other software companies, total of 12 years. But 6 years into it, I read this book by Jonathan Kozol called Savage Inequalities, about the educational disparities in the United States. And I remember getting very angry and ultimately making a commitment that I was going to do something about it. Once I figure out how to go cheap and go back into education and leave industry. And several years later, I did that. I went back to MIT where I got my degrees to run high school outreach programs and the engineering internship program, believing that experiential learning, which was important to me, was valuable for everyone. While I was there, my mentor suggested I pursue a doctorate in education, which I did part-time up the river at the other school in Cambridge, other school that sucks up all the air in Cambridge. And I did that part-time, which allowed me to, again, apply what I was learning in my day-to-day as well. While I was there, I began to have conversations about diversity with faculty. And I've convinced from my training in IBM and other industry roles that you've got to start listening by listening. When you enter into a conversation about diversity, equity, inclusion, you understand what is important to the recipient. You have to start there. You can't start with an ideology. You can't start with an idea. You can't start with a philosophy. You can't start with a strategy or program. You really have to start with listening and understanding what's important. Then you build the solution based on that. And so I started to write about this back in 2007, why diversity matters from your perspective as a faculty member and others. And ultimately, I began to work in creating access and opportunities for young people who are marginalized, whose voice needed to be heard as well. I went to work in nonprofit space for a number of years, running organizations like the National Society of Black Engineers, Chief Academic Officer for the United Negro College Fund, working with historically Black colleges and universities. And then, of course, George Floyd happened. He was murdered, and there was a lot of discussion about social justice and racial justice in the United States. And I'm one of those because I'm an engineer. I'm also a musician as well, and some of the other things, but I'm an engineer, and I like to always begin with impact. And that's why Northeastern appeals to me so much, because we're not just about introducing new knowledge, developing new knowledge, but we're always thinking about what's the relevance to real world application. The use-centered approach is Pasteur's quadrant as well. So when I came here, I came with an idea, as I mentioned, a very generic vision that inclusion had to be the North Star, creating a context and a culture for inclusion. I've evolved even in the past 2 years, and I want to share with you why I've evolved and how that has changed and how it's relevant for this audience as well. So Jim Collins, in his book, not Jim Collins, it's Stephen Covey in his book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, says that effective people are very clear about the end goal. He says, beginning with the end in mind. So we start off with a broad statement. What is our goal? What's our vision for our diversity work? And we start off by saying that Northeastern is committed to creating a welcoming and inclusive community where individuals of all identities, backgrounds, and experiences can thrive, have a strong sense of belonging, and achieve academic and professional and research success as well. So we are really kind of setting that as the North Star. We're not there yet. We're working toward getting there, but it's good to have a direction. But how do we do that? How do we achieve this academic and professional success in creating this inclusive community? By valuing who we are and valuing identities. So the second part of this says that we value and celebrate diversity in all its forms and strive to foster an inclusive culture built on trust, respect, understanding, and empathy. Anyone want to share what trust, beginning the first letters of trust, respect, understanding, and empathy? True. Building a true community is a community that's built on trust. If you have a setting, a place, a workplace, a school, a lab, where you have trust, respect for who you are, and your uniqueness, understanding about your lived experience and what you bring, and empathy, not sympathy, but empathy, which means walking a mile in somebody else's shoes. I can be assured that you're a high-performance organization and people feel they can thrive where they are. And so that's our North Star as a university. This only emerged since I've been here, not because of me, but because of what I've learned, what I've listened to. And so I'll share with you who we are. We are the Office of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion. We have now 8 members. We recently hired Our new Vice Provost for Faculty Diversity, Donathan Brown. Donathan is from our Rochester Institute of Technology. He had a similar role at RIT, and his vision is to build networks and partnerships to create more pipelines for faculty, diverse faculty at Northeastern. Melissa Berry Woods is the Director of Student Diversity and Success, and her job, very similarly, is to do the same for student population, the diversity of our students. And when I say diversity, I'm not just talking about race or gender identity, but all forms of diversity, as we talked about as well. A few others I'd like to highlight is Lisa Susser. And Lisa, down there in the bottom right, for those of you who are looking on the screen or here on the screen, is our Manager of Network Diversity. And it is, Lisa is the person who is responsible for building the network. There are a number of people and organizations like Allied who are doing this work, but having a point of contact in the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion is important. And so with Lisa and Rosa Rodriguez-Williams, who is our executive director, we've met with Allied, we've listened, we've understood, and begin to put some things in place, especially to ensure that there is a sense of belonging among those who have disability status here at the university. This slide just identifies some of the major things that the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion does. We build institutional knowledge and capacity. We believe, and this is from President Ayoun, that everyone should own diversity, equity, inclusion. It should not just be an individual or an office, but it should be owned everywhere, so that we're not the only ones or those in the room fighting for inclusion, fighting for accommodations and access, but everyone is. There's a phrase that says, "Light, many hands make work light." The more people who are involved in this focus on these kind of outcomes, common outcomes, the better. We advance inclusive teaching, learning, and employment practices. We identify and cultivate strategic partnerships, and we're looking for more strategic partnerships to make the experience here at Northeastern better. We sponsor, promote, and support research and programs. Northeastern just launched the Inclusive Impact Innovation Fund, where students, faculty, and staff can come up with new and novel ideas to advance belonging on campus. Again, not top down, but bottom up, because the best ideas are in this room, because you have a lived experience. Many of you have the lived experiences. We support fundraising opportunities. We mitigate structural barriers. So we've had a lot of conversations about structural barriers, physical barriers, as well as procedural barriers here. And we assess and improve the university climate. And I want to take a moment to talk about that, how we're doing and what our response is, and then open it up for discussion. So 2 years ago, Northeastern launched its first diversity and equity climate survey to understand the experiences and the extent to which we are making progress or not with regards to our climate on campus, inclusive climate, and to identify where we need to improve our policies and practices to create more access and opportunities for individuals. 41,000 people received the survey. And in this year, 2 years later, 59,000 have received the survey as well. What I'd like to do is share some of the findings from that, just so that everybody understands. It's available on our website if anybody is interested in hearing more about that. Northeastern respondents overall are more diverse than those at other participating institutions. So it's a common survey. 163 other institutions have taken the survey. And it's so we can compare our results against others. We are more diverse than many of the institutions, including those who identify being part of the disability community. Our climate for diversity and inclusion receives a high overall satisfaction overall. In the aggregate, I'm going to get to the details in a minute. Someone's going to say, really, Karl? You lost me there. A vast majority of respondents believe Northeastern is an inclusive community that accepts and encourages. It's like 73% of the respondents. We are an inclusive community, and that it improves, and diversity improves our interactions. So we believe that having a diverse environment makes us better global citizens, and prepares us for the workforce and for students, etc. Great news. I was happy to see this. And a majority of respondents personally feel a sense of belonging or community. And they have primary connections like this, like Allied and the affinity groups and other groups like diversity as well. Key to sense of belonging. And then finally, a majority of respondents, including the racial and ethnic minorities, have never experienced discrimination or harassment or insensitive or disparaging remarks on campus. Okay, this is for 2021. We happened to be remote for a lot of this, but nevertheless, they've never experienced that. And generally, our respondents are comfortable interacting with people of different backgrounds. Look at this room. This is beautiful. And Mona, this is just, frankly, the UN in this room. All colors and I don't want to say shapes, but you know, I mean, we are. I have a lot of shape around the waist, so you know. But it's just beautiful to see this. However, certain groups within the university feel less satisfied with that climate, are less comfortable sharing their views and identities, have less sense of belonging, hear insensitive and disparaging remarks, or experience discrimination or harassment because of their identities or in their roles as students, faculty, and staff. And that they experience that at higher rates than their peers. A few examples of the communities: racial and ethnic minorities, those who identify as female, non-binary or transgender, the LGBTQ community plus community, and those who identified in the survey as temporarily or long-term disabled. And then those who are politically conservative, and separately, those who are progressive as well. So, and then we have determined that we've discovered that those who have certain roles on campus, if you are an undergraduate, your experience on campus in terms of the diversity climate is not as favorable as your graduate student. If you're a staff and administrator, it's not as favorable as even a graduate student. And if you are in the Boston area campuses, your responses were not as favorable as if you were in some of the other campuses, regional campuses around the world. Interesting. So in terms of our community, this community here, I wanted to share some of the results. 18% of the respondents with long-term disabilities and 8% of respondents with temporary disabilities have experienced incidents of discrimination based on their disability status. So we really wanted to understand that, and some of you may be able to pick this out, but we wanted to say sort of those who don't identify with having a disability versus those who do, and to see the difference. And it's pretty stark about the experiences of discrimination and negative remarks about their disability status. And that bothers me even more so. Because some of the times the incidence of discrimination is inadvertent. Sometimes. And we assume positive regard and positive intent. But negative remarks are not inadvertent. And 35% of respondents with long-term and 22% of respondents with temporary have heard negative remarks about their disability status. This is as we were coming out of the pandemic in 2021. Any reactions to this? First of all, I would love to hear your perspective.
Questions regarding the survey.
Yes.
So you said that like the happy news was that 75% people felt they were not discriminated against, but the remaining 25, the remaining percentage of people felt they were discriminated, and when we like split it apart, we saw that the different groups like women and LGBTQAI
Yes.
and the other groups. So my thought was, does this survey even matter to the people who are not in those groups? Like, because like usually when people face discrimination, it's from the majority, like they sort of discriminate people who are not in the majority. So does the 75% really matter? Shouldn't survey just be more focused on the 25% and maybe a little more than that?
So are you asking about the response?
Yeah.
So we looked at the responses of the survey against the general population, the distribution of the general population for gender, but by the data that we do have. So we don't have very accurate information about disability status at the university, but we do have pretty accurate data, although recently not so, when we moved to Workday, on gender, gender identity, on race, ethnicity, international status as well. And we compared that to the results in the survey. I actually have a slide. I pulled it out because I didn't think somebody would ask about it. So thank you. And look at sort of the parallel. Interesting enough, the 73, I mean, the majority, frankly, of those who responded in the survey tended to be in not one of those groups. So that tells me that at least they're interested in responding to the survey. But then, so I believe we have a pretty good accurate, but we can't make generalized statements. So if you notice, we use the word respondents, just to focus on those who respond as well. So only a few more. I want to just talk about this. Anyone familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of human needs? So I've learned a little more about this over the past 6 to 9 months because I wanted to focus our efforts on what we learned from this survey. We have a fundamental need as human beings, and this is early 20th century that Maslow has done this work based on the observations from his clinical practice. And he says, we as human beings have fundamental needs. And there's a hierarchy that we can't sort of address the hierarchy of the top needs until the fundamental, the basic needs are met. So the first is our physiological need for food, shelter, water, right? Just the avoidance of just the, the need is there, right? You're not going to teach calculus when somebody's looking for a place to live or they're struggling with their roommate. It's very hard to kind of enter into kind of new knowledge in that case. Then there's safety, and including the safety from fear, right? Of any type of threat that's associated with it. But interestingly enough, the next level is belonging. So once our physical needs are met, our shelter, our food, our water, etc., our safety, and we understand the safety, then we want to connect. We want to connect. And if you kind of go further up to cognitive, that's what we're all here for, our learning, our exposure to new knowledge, our creation of new knowledge, those of you in graduate school and PhDs and the like, we have those needs. And we have the need to produce and explore. But first, we got to take care of our belonging. And that's what Allied is doing. That's what our affinity groups do. That's what diverse.
You're so diversibility.
Diversibility. I'm gonna get it. I
know you will.
Diversibility is doing, and that's what we all need. in that. So we decided that belonging had to be the thrust based on the survey that we had, that we really lead with this. And there's actually a notion about this, that if you have a sense of belonging, then you're more likely to have a more diverse, more equitable, more inclusive environment, right? Because I can relax here. I can enjoy myself. I can let my hair out, or if I don't have hair, like I'm losing it, I can just be myself in that setting. And there's a joy about that. And sometimes we do that inadvertently, right? We are drawn to places that accept us, who we are. And it's okay. Claude Steele, the social psychologist, calls it identity safety, being there. So we ended up going out to certain groups, including those in the disability community, and started to ask questions about what does it mean to be a part of this community, and what could we do to improve that sense of belonging? And I only have a few more before we open up for questions. We asked the question, how easy or hard is it to navigate Northeastern and receive support? And we're learning now that even the process of requesting accommodations is not explicit, transparent, and in some cases inclusive. We find that staff tend to go to their managers to ask for accommodations. The manager's like, what? What do you mean? That's the wrong place to go. So a lot of the things that we're learning is just increasing communications and training for managers. It's a low, I mean, I tell you, the bar is low to really fix things here in a lot of ways. The intent is here, but what is one thing that is overlooked related to disabled individuals at Northeastern that you'd want implemented if the campus could do it tomorrow? And that's the question I want to have as part of our discussion. How accessible do you feel the systems at Northeastern are, like Workday and My Northeastern? How has the physical landscape of Northeastern, either in Boston or across the global network, impacted your experience as a disabled individual on campus? You smile.
Yeah.
Why?
I don't know. I mean, I just heavily resonate. Like when I see that question, I just think of, oh, because I remember when I first came here, one of my biggest struggles was like, I knew Northeastern was a big campus, but as someone who has like an invisible illness, like when you look at me, you're probably like, oh, she's fine. She looks like a middle schooler, but nonetheless, I was very like overwhelmed by just how big the campus was. And when my health started to like deteriorate, like last semester, it was difficult to go to my classes because I would be like running across campus and like I couldn't physically take it. And then even just like scheduling, like the way classes are scheduled where you have like 10-minute gaps, especially for people with like mobility issues and physical issues. Like for me, I have heart disease, so it's very difficult. It takes me like 20 minutes to get from like one side of campus to the next. And so it was just interesting to navigate, especially like in my freshman year. I've figured it out now. I now cope, but yeah, nonetheless.
Yeah, and it's stressful, and back to that sense of belonging, right? So how could you, by the time you get to class and you're 10 minutes late, you're probably out of breath.
Just
Yeah. So we could do better by listening, scheduling, making accommodations, and leaning into that, right? Not just having the burden be on you, but the burden be on the institution, and to ask those questions. What is one suggestion you have to change university policy to be more inclusive of faculty and staff or students, right, with disabilities? And this is a question that we're raising to faculty and staff, but we had a similar one for students. What have your interactions with managers been like when related to your disability or accommodations? You smile.
I just have experienced through Mona, because I'm her academic mentor, and the things that she has to figure out is so different from my other mentees. Mm-hmm. And it's challenging. Nobody knows. And so when nobody knows, Mona ends up being the trailbreaker.
And you're a strong, courageous person, not everyone is. And so I always say that your identity is galvanized by the level of your opposition or the struggle that you've gone through. Some people said, I don't have an identity because you really haven't had a struggle. But if you read the history of, for example, the deaf community and how they struggled to sort of maintain accommodations and even their sign language during the period in which we were trying to remove that in the United States, they developed their sense of identity as well. And how do you perceive your ability to be promoted? So if you are a staff member, right, how do you perceive your ability? Do you feel like it's holding you back or not? So I'm going to come back to these questions, but basically we came up with 4 major themes based on this, the listening sessions. We had 14 of them, 175 people over a 3-month period. One, we decided that we would focus on culture, climate, and the community. Our culture as a university, so are we leaning in to ensure that everyone has that sense of belonging and experience? Our climate, how you feel about that, and our connections with our community, okay? The broader community, the local community as well. Are they accommodating for it, and are we engaging with our community? Number 2 is removing structural barriers, back to those barriers, right? That circumscribe full inclusion. What are those barriers? We spent some time talking to the Muslim students about having a place on campus to pray during the day, not having to go all the way back to their dormitory. Just don't have time to do that. So how do we do that? And like I said, frankly, the bar is very low for making changes. It's amazing. I read a book some years ago called The Art of Listening with Love. And I found that for many people, all they want to know is somebody's listened, somebody's heard them. And so just we're listening and we're spending time. Number 3, equity and accountability. Making sure they're equitable processes. Do our disability, those in the disability community, do they feel that they're getting promoted or recognized or getting awards for Huntington 100 or whatever the types of things that we're looking at university? And if not, let's work to close those gaps, making sure they're equitable gaps. Our international students feeling a sense of connection and belonging, and are they getting the support? I've noticed that whenever the Office of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion has an open house, boy, the international students show up on 1201, because there's food, there's availability, et cetera. It's not necessarily other places on campus where that is there. And then finally, investment in infrastructure. In order to do this work, we've got to have investment in infrastructure. Allied has to have resources, and other groups have to have resources and support. And again, the bar is not that high for that. As you know, Mona, we've been able to provide some support. And it's not that much, and don't say that out loud, but it's not that much in order for us to do that. So the last thing I'll just say is when we talk about belonging, and this is my dissertation research, I wanted to know what makes students successful on campus. Not those who fail, but those who are successful. And it turns out there are 4 things. 1, they have great relationships with faculty, okay? Or in the workplace, they have great relationship with their managers, right? Think about vertical integration. Number 2, they have a great peer network, okay? So that's the horizontal integration. They're part of a group like this and others. It's a part of their primary connections as well. Number 3, they have a strong sense of confidence or efficacy that they could be successful in this setting. Of course, all of that is related, right? You've got to have the kind of climate that says you can be successful. We want everyone to walk onto Northeastern's campus, wherever you are in the global network, and feel that you can be successful. Because if you feel you can be successful, you will track that faculty member down. You will track that manager down. You will track down the paperwork, et cetera. But if you don't, every single obstacle is a reason to say, I can't do this. And then the 4th is they're comfortable in their own identity. They're celebrating their identity. One of the things that we discovered is a significant percent of our population, especially those in the disability community, are fearful of revealing their identity for fear of retribution in some ways. That's wrong, because it's effectively saying, let me hide a little bit of you, leave it outside the door. And when you bring yourself into the room, you're not bringing your whole self. Boy, bringing your whole self is great as well. So my research really looked at how we can bring all this together. One's identity, the culture and the climate, one's personal attributes, and one's behaviors into an ecosystem. And that ecosystem, I believe, is belonging. So that's who we are, and love to open it up for questions. First of all, just about the comment, and then maybe there might be a question or two that you'd like to engage in. Is this what you were looking for?
Perfect.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Reid, for putting it so beautifully, and especially the last slide about your research and how one feels that they belong. So yeah, I couldn't have put it more beautifully. And so whoever has questions may.
This is the time to share your thoughts.
Yes.
Share your struggles.
Please.
He's here to
I'm
listen.
taking notes.
He's taking notes.
Well, not, but I won't identify you in the notes. Just taking notes.
Okay. I mean, I know within diversibility, something we talk about a lot is just accessibility for like main campus events. And also with the DRC, like in general, I know for many students, the Disability Resource Center can be, I'm sure, I think you mentioned this as well during the presentation, can be very inaccessible. And even when you get certain accommodations, they don't always follow them. I know, like for me, I have AC as an accommodation just because climate, especially when it gets like above 70 degrees or so, is like a huge thing, especially for kids who have conditions like POTS or really anything related to like the cardiovascular system. It can be very hard to just do your day-to-day life. Oh, sorry, Charlie.
No, sorry.
When you don't even feel comfortable like in your own dorm. And I know for me, like a huge thing we have sometimes with the housing process is even with accessible housing, or like when you get your meeting to get those accommodations, sometimes the people are resistant to give you your accommodations. I know the building I ended up in, I know it's Willis Hall. I was gonna be like, I believe it's Willis Hall. That is the dorm I'm in right now. It has air conditioning in half of the building. And something they didn't tell me when they gave me that building was that it shuts off within the first month of being there. So I was in my dorm, low-key putting my head in a freezer, in a joking way, but nonetheless. And it was even, the conditions like in the room weren't even bearable for my able-bodied roommates. And I remember, thankfully, like the RD, like the resident director and the RAs took care of it very quickly, but it's just small stuff like that that I don't think like able-bodied people might not realize, but it can have a huge impact on someone's ability to just be comfortable in their own space. And especially with the Disability Resource Center, for many kids, it's very hard to get documentation for their disability. And I just know it's a big issue with either maintaining those accommodations or even just trying to get like an appointment to speak about possibly getting a specific accommodation. I know there's also a lot of issues with the note takers. For many students, the note takers, the program does not work or like the way, and it's no disrespect to the Resource Center at all, because I do understand they're underfunded and also like there's not enough staff, which I can imagine if you don't have, the resources to do that, then it must be difficult. But I know that specific program, many students expressed that they would send in requests and it would be like past the time they need notes. They wouldn't even get like a person's name or a person's contact information. And even the students who were hired to be note takers didn't actually take notes. They just kind of took pictures of the slides and sent it to the students. And so I know we discussed about having a way to like double check that the note takers, since it is a paid position, that they're doing what they're meant to do. Anybody else like that? I feel bad if it's just me.
I'd like to talk about something.
Take the floor.
So I'm taking an opportunity to talk to a lot of engineers in this room right now, because I feel like I rarely get to talk about engineering and disability. I like to say that, you know, engineering is a very hard field, and there's a lot of work involved, and it's a lot of rigor, a lot of struggle, and that's kind of part of the, you know, the field itself. It's part of the attitude. And I like to question, to what extent is that level of rigor cross the line and become ableist? Because these curriculum and these courses are designed to prepare you for the real world, designed to test your skills, designed to teach you content and things that you're supposed to learn. But it's designed by most likely neurotypical people or people without disabilities, and it's designed to be hard for people without disabilities. So if someone is disabled, then it might look different for them, for what it means to be successful in engineering. And I think we normalize this as, oh, it's really hard, but that's just how it is, and you have to get over it. We normalize all-nighters, we normalize working insane hours, and it's like, you know, is there another way that we can do this without that? You know, and I think that's a question that not a lot of people are willing to ask or consider, because it's just how it's done. And I think it's an interesting thing to think about that I'd like to explore more.
Have you shared this at all in the in COE?
No, I'm too afraid to talk to anyone about it,
You
really.
should talk to the dean. The dean
He
has-
would be very receptive
And
to
you-
hearing that.
Yeah.
And you
Yeah.
can always come and talk to me too.
Yeah.
I am a disabled engineer.
Mona's very friendly.
Okay.
She only bites a little bit.
But I think that you raised
That was a joke.
you raise it in such a way that it elevates the conversation to culture, right? When I started engineering, the late Paul Gray was the president of MIT, and he got up in front of all the freshmen and says, "I'm just got appointed president, as a provost. I'm going to change the culture of MIT, slow down, be more reflective, because reflection is the key to learning. We know that, right, from learning." He stepped down 10 years ago, said, "I failed," right? Because the culture of this institution was the grind. It was just the grind. And again, for neurotypical, it was hard, all-nighters and things like that. So I think that there's a system of expectation that I did it, so you have to go through the pain. It's like pledging a fraternity or sorority, very much so. But it's not necessary, because we know now from learning science, it's some of it is not. But this dean is not an engineer. He's a computer scientist. He comes from a different discipline. Computer science has their own problems, as we know. But the fact that he's a boundary spanner means that I think he'd be open for this discussion as well. And I think you raise it in such a way, I think, could elevate the discourse and the conversation about this. And not just in engineering, but I'm sure some of you in the College of Science and some of the other disciplines, even music. I mean, there's a rigor that's associated with, in many cases, that may be unnecessary. I don't know what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I'm curious. As a professor, so I teach the entry biomechanics class or sophomore level classes, which are sometimes the first hard class that people have taken. Hard for multiple reasons. I think the concepts are new, so it's different than just freshman physics, which you've already seen before. The concepts are new, and there's a lot of them. Do we need to have all those concepts? I feel like maybe we could cut some out, but you're trained to be an engineer, and there's certain things that we feel engineers know. So I would say that nobody fails my class because the material is difficult. They fail because of time management. And so I would say, like, what's the difference between rigor and busy work? Are you learning, and what makes it so stressful?
Also,
That's where I would.
I want to add to that. Yeah, I want to add to that actually too. I think one of the things, at least for me, I can speak from my own life experience. When I first started off as a wee little undergrad, I had no idea what exactly I needed for accommodations personally. And then what I realized first though is, let's say I never did a night. I did one all-nighter and I swore I would never do that ever again. It was like the worst experience. I stayed up all night to do a problem set and then I slept in class. It was like completely like pointless for me. But this is what I learned. I learned personally, and you need good professors and you need systems to help make this happen too. Oh, it might take me 3 times longer to like finish a problem set. And so I want to make sure that my professor knows this, or I need an accommodation for like maybe the deadline of my problem set be a slightly different day because of how my readers at the time had scheduled to sit with me. Exams were double time, whatever it was for me, like I needed to figure those pieces out. And it was like rough in the beginning. But I think one thing that I personally value my postdoc advisor for is that there's a difference between like upholding rigor, but not making it torturous. I don't know if that makes any sense.
No.
Yeah, so my postdoc advisor completely understood that I am blind and that I would need to take so much longer to get certain things done. But when I submitted those things to him, he upheld them at the same level of rigor as all of what he expects from a postdoc. But then it might have taken me like another month or so to finish it. Does that make sense? And that's something I really valued about my postdoc advisor, because he never lowered his standards for me, but he worked with how I needed to work. And I think that's where we need to go. What do you think?
So I think that, I'm sorry, I don't know your name.
I'm Sandra Shufflebein.
So I think you bring up a great point with the amount of content that is asked for a class is like, well, how do we fit it in without it being so much work? And I think some of the things that I've noticed are certain times there's certain things you can adjust slightly to make things easier for students that seems to be unfairly, cruelly added for no reason. Like, instead of having, write 10 pages on something, why don't we write 5? Or something like, why do we have to learn how to mathematically prove something when the equation's there? It seems like something that we can just use anyways. And there's other things, like if you ask anyone in industry how much they use from their job, it's usually around like 20 or 30% from what they learned in school. So I still feel like it's important to learn all those things. I just think that if you take a big step back and look at the big picture, what ways can you make it more accommodating for different types of learners and different types of speeds that people might go at, and question the level of like how it is right now. Could you do the same thing with something easier, or not easier, but like more accommodating? But it's a hard question. I don't have the answer. I'm just one person.
As a professor, it's hard everybody learns in different ways. So I have to write something down to be able to learn it. Some people have to listen, and they can't learn if they're writing down because they're too distracted. So as a professor, we take that into account. So I record all my lectures now, which is terrifying because that means they don't have to come to class. But I understand that some people, it really benefits them from having that recording so they can go back and listen more slowly. So same with assigning homework. Some people learn by repetition. That was me. I had to do tons and tons of problems. So why do we have 10 problems rather than just 5? Because some people need that repetition. Some people are going to do 20 problems. So I think in choosing how we form the class, people are trying to take into account all these different learning abilities, because you might need only the 5 problems because the 20 problems takes you too long, but I need the 20 problems because I can't learn it unless I do it 20 times. So I think more understanding of those differences probably could be, professors could be reminded of it.
Yeah.
I know like one thing, Sandra, you actually just reminded me, the accessibility of classes such as keeping Zoom options would be so nice, just because I know like within our club, that's also something we discussed, was how I know, like, I apologize for so many personal experiences, but just to like put it into context, I know for me, over the break, I had major surgery, and so I didn't come back to school till about like a month into the semester. And one of the biggest things that affected me was I still wanted to take my classes, despite my doctor's advisement to defer. But nonetheless, I remember a major thing we had to do was contact the DRC in order to get permission to attend my classes via online. And even though my teacher said that was completely okay and they were very flexible, I still struggled with the DRC, and then them saying if it's longer than 2 weeks, which it was because it was major surgery, major recovery, then that wasn't considered an appropriate amount of time to get said accommodation.
The DRC stopped you, not the faculty.
So I'm gonna be honest, I did it anyway. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that, but I did just attend my classes online anyway because my teacher said it was okay. But so sometimes if your teacher is very flexible and very understanding of your situation, you can bypass the DRC.
But we are told, don't do that.
Not to do that.
But I do it anyway. I do it anyway.
I
Personally.
promise I won't. I
So-
won't say the professor.
One of the things that I do on the first day of class, this is my personal belief.
Mhm.
I'm here to help you learn. So I say, welcome everybody. I'm here as your teacher. So help me help you learn. That means tell me what I could do to make this class more accessible to you. And I open this up to everybody. And then it's up to people to come to me to tell me. And some students will be like, look, professor, like it's really hard for me to attend. I make attendance mandatory in the class. I'm like, that's fine. Watch the recordings, but then send me a thought to count as your attendance or whatever via email. Okay, solution done. Like it's about, and I had a student once who was in hospital the entire time I was teaching a semester. She had, you know, medical needs and whatever. And she was one of the best students I ever had. She like stuck to the the system we set up. And so for me as a faculty, I have the ability to do that in my classroom, right? As long as people can come and talk to me and be like, hey, this is what I need. Because my goal is to help you learn.
I wish more teachers, I mean, I've been grateful enough to have many teachers like you. I wish you were my teacher actually, but I'm a music major, so not possible.
You're welcome to take biomedical.
Maybe I'll compare minor.
You got new recruits. Well, I mean, it's just so. I mean, is this an accident that this is so heavy? This group is that heavily represented by the College of Engineering in this? Is that
Well, it's run by engineers.
Right.
So.
And again, that sense of connection and
We're
belonging
problem solvers,
matters.
I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's all about like, let's find a solution. But Karl, you said it really clearly, like it's all about like listening. And I think we need to listen to each other and then we can work towards the solution.
But it has to be 2 ways because we can't listen if nobody tells us. And that's where sometimes at the end of the semester, a student will come up and say like, oh, well, this isn't working for me. Oh, I wish you would have told me.
Yeah, so tell us now. What else? And it's okay. Don't feel like bad about sharing. Who wants to share more thoughts, ideas, like anything? Grievances.
So I have kind
What's
of
your name? Sorry.
Ashna.
Okay.
Yeah. Related more again to like the kind of culture and climate part of it, right? If I can take from kind of my own experience, I have a chronic condition. My entire family has it. So I never got diagnosed. I just learned how to deal with it from them. So for me, like from the outside, it's really something, and I'm sure it's the same way for a lot of students on campus. It's something that's really easy to hide until it's like very suddenly not, right? So like something that I really want to see more of is like kind of an understanding that like when you go into a room, you can't really immediately pick out who is disabled and who isn't, right? This is not my thing, but someone with disability, one of my friends, was telling me how she's taking a class in disability media or something. I don't exactly remember what it was. But every week they have discussion posts. And every week, one of the discussion questions would be somehow related to the topic. Imagine you're disabled. How is this going to change your life? And she was like, I can't, the premise doesn't apply to me. I am disabled. I can't imagine how my life would be different. This is already my life. And so that kind of thing is really something that's very othering. Of like, disabled people are over there, we're over here, right?
Yes. So, like nobody can actually imagine that there's somebody in their class that actually has a disability.
Or they look at you strange, like, really? Yeah.
So, you know, there's a series of Boston Globe articles about the use of the word ladies, right? Yeah, so as a superintendent, and I'm sensitive about time. Is it, if you're okay, I'm okay with time. Wish I could buy you more snacks. So so a superintendent candidate in East Hampton, Massachusetts, was negotiating his final salary and his package, and he sends an email to the board chair and her executive assistant, 2 women, and his salutation was ladies, and then he just put in a request. Well, they were so upset by his addressing them as ladies in that way that they got the board to change the vote and rescind his offer. So this article was, so what went wrong here? And in most cases, and so they called me and asked me, Mike, you know, we're looking for DEI experts, leaders, what do you think? And my first reaction was they overreacted. But then I realized I'm a man, and I'm male, and identify as male, identify as cisgender, et cetera, et cetera. So I have to be careful how I responded. So the second point was, why don't we ask people how they prefer to be addressed? And then third is, they lost an opportunity to have a meaningful conversation about what is appropriate and what is not as well, by just rescinding this, right? So your point is that if we can have, no one is going to be perfect in this world. I mean, in terms of how we address individuals, how we use language, because language in and of itself evolves over time. So instead, why can't we have a culture, again, back to culture, where if you were offended by how you were addressed or how the class othered you, why can't we go to the professor and say, I was really upset about this? And the professor said, you know, put the burden back on him or her or them, right? Rather than on you as an individual, that you've done something wrong. It's actually put it in, if somebody came to me, I mean, they do all the time, right? Because it's like, I'm so sorry, but a new crease in the brain. I've learned something new. So it's not a crease, you know what I mean? So the point is that, did that person not feel comfortable? Did you not feel comfortable having that conversation?
I mean, like, I don't know about that person in particular. For me, it's just something that, like, I feel just over and over and over again, that, like, in a lot of places, it's a sense of, like, we can say anything we want about disabled people, but they're not here right now, right? We're not told anyone. It's just constant to the point where it feels like it's a bigger problem than I can solve just by saying, like, hey,
I see what you mean. Yeah. And that's my role, to really address the culture and the climate. And in this conversation, I'm thinking about how can we do that across the university? I have an idea, but I'd love to get you. You were about to say something about that. Excellent.
Oh, I was going to share like a personal moment for me, is that for a long time, people would meet me and they meant this harmlessly, but they would say, wow, you're blind, you don't look blind. Okay. And when I was carrying around internalized ableism, I was like, oh, okay. Like somehow I took that as a compliment. But then I realized how detrimental this was, because what they were doing was even othering me from the other blind people. And somehow that was better. But in reality, what do you mean I don't look, I am blind? Like, what is it that you're trying to say? So there's like many layers there that I personally had to work through.
So we get this as well. You're not like other Black people, right? What does that mean? Have you heard that as well? What does that mean? Well, you're articulate. Oh, okay. Now you're really that literally. I mean, that's where it goes. And so I challenge people on that. And I'm at that point where I can. I'm 60, right? So I've been through these experiences, these microaggressions, these slights for so long, but I don't take it personally. I basically use it as a learning opportunity. That's my general reaction. When they told me in high school, when I was 18, that I got into MIT because of affirmative action, my response was, well, let me study harder for the AP calculus test to prove you wrong. I did want to jump across the table and strangle him, but I didn't. Someone said that's what you should have. But no, it said my response was that. And I got into MIT and graduated with a 4.5 out of 5.0 GPA. And I went back to him years later, because I did, just to let him know that I graduated and that he was wrong. So that's just generally my makeup. But over time, we experience these micro assaults. And part of my dissertation was understanding racial identity theory. And you probably have a very similar set of patterns where your disability is not salient to your identity at some point, right? Early on, it's not, you think you're being treated the same as other people until you realize you're not. And then it's called encounter, is the second phase, where you have one or many of those experiences and you start to realize, wait a minute, I'm being treated differently because of X. The third stage is immersion, which is this period where you just don't want anything to do with people who are different from you, because you really want to explore who you are. That's the radical phase, right? A lot of people go into this phase like, I'm gonna, and anytime you get a slight, you want to jump across the table, right? And address them, or in any way, right? You all do that in social media now, but we didn't have that. The fourth stage is immersion. Ultimately is when you start to kind of come out of that and begin to internalize who you are, and you are comfortable in your own skin. President Obama, first Black president, puts a basketball court in the White House, right? Some people wouldn't do that, but he was internalized. He was comfortable in his own skin. And the last stage is called commitment. That is when you start to advocate for that identity, the people, forming ally, for example, right? So you have to understand that you kind of will go through these process. Some people get stuck in one phase and they stay there and they get very angry and upset, and they really become people that is very difficult to live with, right? As a result of that. But you have the community and understanding that getting through that, and then you start to become internalized. I'm proud to be an African-American, Jamaican, Asian, Canadian, right? Celebrating that, celebrating my skinny legs and all the other things that come with me, right? Being comfortable in that skin. And then I start to work to create access and opportunities for people like me who come out of that experience. So understand, you will go through those periods, but I am working on the environment, the top of that pyramid, making sure it's a little more inclusive so that you don't have to fight. You may have to fight, but hopefully the next generation of students won't. Yes, Jackie.
I'm sorry to go back to the topic I was talking about earlier, but I feel like I've had some time to think about it a little bit more. And I remembered I had a professor that I think really, I didn't realize it at the time, but in hindsight was one of the best professors in terms of accessibility in engineering I've had. And I think what he did was really brilliant. So I just kind of wanted to talk about that a little bit because I think I wasn't clear on like possible, like what does it look like to be more accommodating in engineering. So this professor, the way it was set up is the syllabus laid out basically the entire course without exception how it was going to function. It said every week there's going to be a homework, and then every other week there's a small quiz, and then there's one final project. And that was told you on day one. And then in the syllabus, there was in the schedule, every week had a chapter, like it tells you the pages in the textbook. And so not only that, but he would record all the Zooms and make them accessible. So there were certain days where I just couldn't go to the class because of like anxiety or some other mental thing. And so it was really easy to just look at what pages I missed, read the textbook, look at the recording. And I think that was really good. Another thing he did is he provided outline notes. So they're like notes that are not filled in. You print them out, and then they're doing it on the whiteboard. The same notes you have, they're filling it in. And so you just fill in along with them. I think that's something, I don't personally use that. I take my own notes, but that's something I think a lot of kids benefit. I saw a lot of kids doing that. Other things were he, for the quizzes, he made study guides for you with basically all the equations on it. Stuff that other courses, I would have to go through the textbook and make my own study guide. A lot of other courses, they say, oh, you have 2 pieces of paper that you'll have, it's open note, but you have to make your own study guide. And all the times those take hours, like 5 hours, just copying stuff, when this professor just gave it to you and it's open note. And I felt like there was no difference between the two except the time was decreased. I didn't have to work as much. And I felt like I accomplished the same thing. Also, this professor had a diversity final project related. So that was awesome. So he did a bunch of other things too. I don't remember, but there's certain small things like that, which I think people might overlook, but are kind of, I like to celebrate those things when professors do stuff like that.
What do you think about doing a webinar to share some of these best practices? And I'm thinking of a panel with a handful of students to talk about those experiences that were positive and supportive and engaging. And then we can talk about sort of the 3 or 4 things. I mean, my colleague, who I did mention, Cecilia Kufo, who's the director of communications, when she helped me work on the slides, she actually did her research to find out what kind of slides would be more acceptable and how to present too. So she said, you know, put the words up there, give people the chance to read. I mean, there were things that she taught me in preparation for this. And I'm wondering if there's a way for us to have a platform in the fall where we can share.
I would love to have the student voice, because as a faculty, so we can take accessibility workshops from Cattler, like use the non-sensory font because that's good for certain dyslexia. Like on Canvas, it tells you how accessible your notes are, but we just don't know. So hearing it from the students, if we can find students who are brave enough to share, it'd be so helpful. Because those are all, like, that just sounds like a normal class to me. So I apologize that you don't have a syllabus that outlines what's happening and has regular schedule.
I mean, other teachers
like
try to do it, but what the difference was the page numbers. And a lot of times the teachers will go on tangents, or they won't follow the book, or they'll their lectures are unpredictable. So if you miss a lecture, it's kind of like you don't really know what you missed, and you kind of have to watch recording or get it from a friend. But the way this professor did it was very predictable, and I think that was one of the things that I really valued.
I know. Sorry, I don't.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
I know even in the, not to out the music major, but many of the professors within the music industry major don't have a structure. You walk into the class, there is no syllabus, or they're like, "We'll post it," and then they don't post it. And I think it's also just like the culture of the major, because everyone thinks, "Oh, you're a music major, that's so relaxed," and it's like, thankfully, the majority of my professors have had syllabus, but like I can't say it's a normal thing within the concentration. So.
It was really, like, for me, it was really cool to hear what you were saying, because I provide blanked out notes. I have a quiz every week, actually, for my class, like a very specific problems. Like, I structure my class very clearly from day one, and it's clear what lectures are being covered every week. And I like the rhythm and the routine of it. And a lot of my students actually come up and tell me afterwards that they really appreciate it, because when the final comes around, they feel ready. So I don't know. I feel like you validated me right now.
What about CPS? What do you do? They provide correct syllabus for your?
In our case, in our course, most of the professors are adjuncts, like they work in the industry during the daytime and they come in the evening. So I believe more than the syllabus being structured, they gave us real life case scenarios in alignment, which is much more beneficial, because we'll go out in the industry in like months and then work. So they share some case studies or some files which they are currently working on. So it gives us a more real life outlook.
That's great. That's great.
I think we're running out of time.
Yes.
And I don't want to keep Valerie too long.
Yes.
And yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you
all.
Thank you, Dr. Reid, for first of all
Oh,
listening.
y'all have my heart.
I think you're the first
Cry,
allied speaker who's listening more than talking. Thank you so much for that, for sharing, listening, and being part of such a meaningful conversation. And here's a small token of appreciation from Allied.
Thank you. I thought it was just something to prop your laptop up. Thank you so very much. So let's talk about something that we could do in the fall for a platform. Will you have co-op, any of you?
No.
I'm doing classes in the fall.
In the fall. So,
So maybe you guys could start to talk to students and find out who would be willing to tell their story about what makes a class accessible.
Absolutely. We also do have elections on Monday, so our new e-board will be determined by Monday night. So we can definitely start that over the summer, but we would love to get involved. We've been discussing wanting to do something like this for a while, actually.
Please also consider inviting us to one of your
that'd be great.
Your meetings.
We would love that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I can definitely keep you all in the loop. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Valerie. Thank you, Valerie.
Remember, the conversation does not end here. Let's carry the knowledge and inspiration we've gained today forward into our lives, our communities, and our work. Together, we can create a world that is more inclusive, more compassionate, and more accepting for everyone, regardless of their abilities. Stay connected by subscribing to our YouTube channel, The Allied Project. Also follow us on our social media, Allied_NEU. We have many more enlightening events and discussions lined up, and we'd love to have you subscribe to our newsletters by contacting us on allied@northeastern.edu. Thank you once again for your participation and support. Until next time, take care, stay inspired, and let's continue working towards a more inclusive world. Goodbye, and see you again.